Attribute selectors allow us to target elements based on a given attribute or value. So let's take a look at 5 simple examples of using attribute selectors. The most basic attribute selector will target an element's attribute no matter its value. For example, in the HTML file for this page, we have several different elements. Some elements, like the h1, span, and links, have class attributes, while some elements, like the paragraph and form, do not. So we can target only those elements that have class attributes with an attribute selector. A basic attribute selector consists of the attribute name surrounded by square brackets. So in our style sheet, we'll create our first attribute selector by typing a set of square brackets, then writing class inside of them, followed by the set of curly braces. I'll then style it with a few CSS properties. So I will give it a background color of crimson and a color value of white, followed by 5 pixels of padding. So when I save the style sheet and refresh the browser, notice how only those elements with a class attribute have the new color and padding styles applied, even if their class attribute values are different. So if we add a class attribute to our form element, for example, I will give it the value email form or eForm. When I save it and refresh the browser, we can see the same styles applied to the form element because, again, the selector is only matching the class attribute. It's not concerned with the value. But say we only want to select links that have a class attribute. Well, all we have to do is define the A element before the attribute selector. So right before the first square bracket. So I'll save the style sheet, and when we refresh the browser, we can see how the links with class attributes are the only ones selected, not the one here at the bottom. To target the attribute and the value, we'll simply need to add the value inside the square brackets. So for example, our first link's class name is foo. So in our selector, we'll need to write the value next to the attribute. So we'll type equal, then foo inside the quotation marks. So it's written just like it is in the markup. So I'll save the style sheet, and when we refresh, we can see that the link with the class foo is now the only one selected on the page. So this is another way of targeting classes with CSS, but we should avoid this method for targeting classes because the browser has to do a little extra work to match the elements. It's always better to use the CSS class selector method we discussed in an earlier lesson instead. So let's go over other ways these attribute selectors can be really useful. For example, we can use them to target input types in our form elements. To target a text field, we can target an input element's type attribute. So to target our text type attribute, in our style sheet, we'll go ahead and type input, a set of square brackets, and inside of them we'll type type equals text. I'll then go ahead and give it a width property, followed by a height of 25 pixels. I will then give it a 2-pixel solid gray border, and finally a background property and the value light yellow. So we'll save our style sheet and we'll review it in the browser. When we refresh it, we see how our type equals text attribute selector match the text field. Cool. Even if we want to use the new HTML5 email input type, we can type email and the value. Then in our CSS, we'll simply change text to email. And as we can see, it works exactly the same way. Next, to target the submit input type, in our CSS, we'll simply create a new attribute selector by typing input, the set of square brackets, then type equals submit. Then I'll go ahead and add some CSS properties for our submit button. I will give it a margin left property, the value 5 pixels. We will give it a width of 100 pixels, height of 30 pixels. We will take away its border styles by giving it a value of none. Then a background color value of steel blue. And finally, a color value of white. So we'll save our style sheet and take a look at it in the browser. When we refresh, our button looks much better now with the new styles applied, because we've instructed the browser to target the input type with the value submit. So as we can see, we can pretty much match any attribute of an element, even attributes like target. I'll show you what I mean. So say we wanted to style all links that open in a new tab different from those that don't. So in our bottom link, I will go ahead and add the target attribute, and I will give it the value blank. I'll save the index file, and in our CSS file, I will go ahead and create the new attribute selector by first typing a square bracket, then inside the target attribute and the value blank. Next, I'll give it a text decoration property with the value none, followed by a border bottom property where I will give it a 2-pixel dotted crimson border. So when we save our style sheet and review it in the browser, we can see how the link with the blank target was the only one selected by the browser. When using attribute selectors, keep in mind that they have the same level of specificity as classes and the pseudo-class selectors we'll be covering in the next video. We can use these attribute selectors in all modern browsers, including i7 and above. Coming up next, we'll take selectors a step further when we learn how to use pseudo-classes to dynamically add styles to elements.